So the data that was recorded on those knots in this picture that is in the background is the actual Khipu. It's accounting data. Calendrical Khipu was discovered 5 years ago approximately, and in chronicles oftentimes you see mentions about narratives and myths and religion and genealogy of the Incas. However, we don't know how to read those type of Khipus, unfortunately, but hopefully one day. So currently there is a Khipu research database developed by Gary Urton from Harvard University. Currently he is the chair of the Department of Anthropology there. And in 2009, him and his, at the time, undergraduate student, Carrie Breslin, they developed a database with the values of those knots. In the database, you are able to see what color each chord is, what the value, because each chord symbolizes the value, and furthermore, I'll show you how that works, and the directionality of a chord. So a lot of different data. However, the main problem with that is that there are very few scholars who are able to work with it, because to understand Khipu, first of all, you have to be fluent in Spanish, because you probably have to work with the Spanish chronicles that occasionally mention this tool, and you also have to be fluent, hopefully, or at least have a basic knowledge of the Quechua language, the main language of the Inca Empire, and you have to have a pretty extensive knowledge of statistics and preferably programming. So very few anthropologists and archaeologists are able to apply those tools and have that kind of a wide knowledge of different subjects that are oftentimes not related to one another. And the database is available in MySQL format and also in Excel. And what I work with Khipu is I prefer to use the Excel files, because I process the Khipu in MATLAB, which is MATLAB is an environment that allows usually engineers or physicists to process gobs and gobs of data and visualize it. It's especially popular among structural engineers because you can see the data in 3D. But I use it for statistics. However, you can also use R. R is free of charge, but a lot of people complain about R. So my software of preference is MATLAB. And so Khipu Database gave an unparalleled access to this wonderful knowledge, because a lot of Khipus are placed in museums all over the world. And previously, two scientists from Cornell University and another one's actually from Ithaca College, but they all live in both of them live in Ithaca. They developed something similar to Khipu Database, and they developed it in the 70s, and it was called the Ushers Data Book. And those two scientists, they're married to one another, so that's why in the Andean studies we call them the Ushers. So they developed a data book full of data on Khipus, but the problem is that the data book is in a microfilm format, and you would have to order it from Cornell University, and they have only 2 copies or 3 copies available. So imagine a microfilm. When I had to work with it first, I was kind of puzzled, because it's really hard to find a microfilm reader these days, and it's not the best format. So Gary Urton, he traveled all over the world, and also scholars who work with him, they traveled all over the world and recorded Khipus. And so he created a fresh database with his own data that is independent from the Ushers, but you can always compare his with the Ushers. And of course they're very similar, because it's the same Khipus. And overall right now there are around 800 Khipus that exist in the world, because a lot of them were destroyed during the colonial times. There was the third consul of Lima that ordered destroy all the Khipus, because they were associated as they represented the power of the Incas, and the Spaniards had to get rid of that symbol of power, because an informational tool is a great source of knowledge and power. So one of the first things that the Spaniards did, they ordered it to be destroyed. However, for some time they tried to use it, and since it's a very precise tool, they use it for accounting, for keeping the tribute, the labor, the logistics, distribution of goods throughout the empire. So in the beginning, they were actually using the Khipu masters for providing them with the data, and eventually Khipu got destroyed. But we still have 800 samples, and approximately there are 300 plus samples in the database, and a lot of samples are actually private collections in Europe. So if you know someone who's willing to share, that'll be great. We'll all be very excited to look at that Khipu. So what it looks like, basically there's one main chord, and there are smaller chords attached to the main chord, and there are two different types of attachments. And these terms are typical for textile terminology, so if you're an archaeologist who works in textiles, you'll probably understand what I'm talking about. So basically imagine my hand is the main chord, and the chords, the other chords are attached either in verso or recto attachment style. So there is also the S, Z, ply, and spin of the chord. That's another interesting parameter for us to study. But in this particular example that I will give you, we will look at versa and recto attachment. And at first you would think, oh, how significant is it? Some kind of an attachment of a chord to or not? Like, well, why does it matter? But the Khipus, the way the information was encoded in Khipu, it was actually binary. And right now a lot of researchers come to the idea that it was more of in a 3D format. So you didn't just use the color of the chord or a number of knots. You were actually using a lot of different parameters in order to encode and read that information. So these are the different colors. There are two types of coloration of a chord. And the color of a chord could be just one straight color, or it could be spliced into two. It could be barber pole, so it looks like a barber pole. And a mottled, it's when initially during the spin and the ply, the textile was actually mixed up into different colors. So by the time the Khipu master, that's what they're called, the Quechua word is Khipu Kamayuk, but it's super long, so I don't want to overload you guys with information. So they would actually take a pre-prepared chord and choose the color when they wanted to encode the information. So what the traditional structure of Khipu looks like. So this is my attempt at understanding Adobe Illustrator, so please don't judge me. I know that I don't have any future in fine arts, but I tried my best. So maybe in Khipu, there's some chance. So the first level, imagine those pretty bits that they're actually knots. I tried to portray knots through that. So the first level is thousands, the second level is hundreds, and then tens, and then units. So if we look at the first chord, we can see that it's 1,233. So that's how you would read that, and that's how a Khipu master would read accounting information. It was an accounting Khipu. But a lot of Khipu, as we say, they were actually narrative, so then it gets more complicated than just the simple scheme. There are so-called subchords, little chords that are attached to other chords, and in the Khipu database they are coded as U. So in my future example, when you see U, it means it's that little subchord that's attached to the other chord. And U means unknown because sometimes it's hard to read what they mean, and it's a big debate right now in Khipu studies what the unknowns are and how to count them. So we'll just kind of exclude them we won't pay too much attention to those, but I will still, for the purposes of statistics, I will still include them in the sample. So I took, from the Khipu database, I took a random sample of Khipus from these areas that you can see of Peru. They were found in those areas. And the main question was, will I find a pattern? Will I find something that is a recurring kind of pattern throughout different Khipus that come from different areas of Peru? And some of them are actually found in Bolivia and Chile, but the ones in the sample are from modern-day Peru. And if I do find a pattern, that means that Khipus are actually standardized, Because some scholars argue, oh, all those knots, they don't really mean that much, because a Khipu master could just come up with some coding, mechanism or idea and code it the way he wanted it. But that's not true, because some of them seem to have patterns. And if I can prove the statistics that this is the case, then yes, actually there is the standardization across different areas of the Inca Empire, and at least this is one of the patterns that are occurring. So I use MATLAB, and MATLAB, I don't know if anybody worked with MATLAB, but the information is coded into a matrix. So what I do, I put the UVR, V being verse attachment, R being recto attachment, and U is unknown. So the x-axis, let's say for example x-axis or y, doesn't matter, is the attachment type, and a y-axis is the value, because each chord has the value expressed with knots. And the z value will be their distribution, so how they are correlated will be the third dimension in MATLAB. I know it sounds like, oh my gosh, it's so boring. But this is, you have to do that stuff for understanding those sophisticated ancient systems of communication. Who would have thought? First I plot the data in MATLAB, and as you can see, there are a lot of peaks on the values of 10, 20, 50. The Incas used a decimal system of counting. So even their labor was organized in 5 units of 10 people, and then those 5 units were divided into 2, and then again they represented 10, and there were 5 subunits of 10. So basically it was a 10-based system. I won't get too much into the detail here, but it was a 10-based system of communication. Then I bootstrapped this data and divided the values by 10, so it's pretty logical to get the logarithmic value because it was a 10-based system. And what it also means in accounting, that means that oftentimes, for example, they had 9 workers, but they will round up this number to 10 because the Incas expected to see the 10-based value. So the Khipu accountants would actually not make up, but sort of balance out the numbers up to 10. And you can also see those mentions of that phenomenon in the chronicles. And if you look at the Khipu values themselves, you see that even modern days accountants do that. They approximate, so the values will balance out. So here you can see the U, V, and R, and all these distributions. The main phenomenon, you can see that U clearly stands out. It's so far away from all the other ones that, what does this mean? That means that the values of V are recurrently significantly higher than the values of either U or R. And this is the distribution of all the chords except for V. So in comparison to all these U and R chords, V clearly stands out. So this is a pattern, this is an obvious pattern, and unfortunately we don't have a Khipu Rosetta Stone to claim what that actually means, but it could be anything. It could be, for example, debit or credit, or something that was predominantly higher. Or, for example, the Incas were big fans of counting labor. It could represent labor as well. That's why it's so high. Or we can guess, but from the hard data we can see that this is a recurrent pattern of V being significantly higher. And then I did another sample, and the same thing happened. The V also stood out. Here the graph is not as pretty, but at least I played with the colors. And now finally I will touch upon open access. Having an open access database, what does that mean? Because Khipu Research Database is an open access, it's sponsored by National Science Foundation, and one of the requirements of that grant is to have it open access. And on one hand, it's definitely the education of general audience about the Khipus. It's elimination of elitism. So previously only researchers or scholars from certain institutions who would get permission to work in those museums would be able to see Khipu. And plus those researchers will have to have so much money and so many grants so they would be able to travel all over the world to see the Khipu, because a lot of Khipus are located in Berlin, a lot of Khipus are located all across the United States, and a lot of them are located all across Europe and South America. So imagine from the financial standpoint how hard that is to actually have access to this data. And so yes, it does certainly eliminate elitism and provide enough opportunities for other people to research the subject. However, here comes the question of reputation and credibility, how credible the results of those researchers are. It's a good question. But from the Khipu database experience, since it requires a lot of knowledge of statistics and maybe some computer programming, and then you'll have to read a lot of colonial records, a lot of already available articles on the subject, very few people can actually sit down and work with that. So in Khipu studies, so-called, we have very few people, and one of them is currently, his name is Frank Salmon, retiring. Unfortunately, next week he's going to be commemorated at the American Anthropological Association in at San Francisco. So unfortunately, he's retiring, and there are very few people. There are literally 3 people right now working in this area in the United States, and 1 person in Finland. So, so yes, this is by default. It's not the most popular subject, unfortunately. But if you look at Maya studies, for example, there's FAMSI. FAMSI is a popular website for Maya scholars, and there they face a problem of, I have a lot of Mayanist friends, and they always tell me stories about crazy people emailing them about the 2012 end of the world, and I feel so sorry for them. I feel so privileged that I don't have to deal with that stuff, but they do have to face a lot of, you know, people who are into sci-fi and things like that, and partially that's because a lot of codices became available to the general audience, and people with very rich fantasy, you know, creativity in their brain, they like to engage in that kind of studies. So I feel sorry for the Mayans. Right now, so this is the Khipu project. And while preparing for this conference, I noticed that a lot of papers were on Twitter and social media. So I decided to share a little bit of my experience, because my other research project is actually based on studying the modern media and Twitter, and studying them quantitatively, because as you can understand, I'm a big fan of MATLAB, and I think a big question here is how to quantify the data that we get from social media. This is not easy, it's all subjective, but to get published, you can't just, you know, capture a couple of tweets and come up with some conclusions or just write your observations. You have to actually provide some sort of quantitative methodology for publication. And in the United States right now, one of the most popular methodologies come from 2011 Mason Golder article in Science magazine, where they analyzed thousands and thousands of tweets, and they analyzed the mood fluctuations of people from different parts of the world. And you can find this article if you Google Science magazine and Twitter. This is going to come up. That's the only article right now on Twitter in such a big journal. And so in this talk, I decided to apply that methodology and research the word archaeology right before the conference. So basically, my point here is to show you this methodology that is currently used by a lot of researchers of social media and social scientists and also computer scientists. So in case you decide to actually quantitatively understand your Twitter data, you will have the scientific method that is accepted by the scientific community. So it's not just some, you know, made up and whatever. This is actually the method. So first of all, you need to deal with the Twitter API. Twitter API allows you to record tweets. It has some limitations, and it's free of charge. You get the unique code for your name. So one person cannot have two API access codes. That's illegal. It means that you're breaking the Twitter policy. And per day, one person can record 500,000 tweets, which is terrible because one project that I did was London Olympics closing ceremony, and right now I'm processing the data from that. London Olympics closing ceremony on Twitter, 30 minutes and you run off that limit. It's done. You have 500,000 tweets, but the ceremony is still going on, and the Spice Girls are there, and people are tweeting and all emotional about it, and how am I going to lose this opportunity? I can't. So then you have to find some alternative methods, and there are currently only 2 companies in the world that have access to Twitter data, and they also have access to historic Twitter data. And one is called, I think, GIP or something. Some funny name, and the other one is the one I use, so I know their name very well because we've been having a good communication and mutual collaboration for the past 7 months. So, and the third being the Library of Congress, because Twitter donated tweets from the day 1 to the Library of Congress. And at some point they will become available to the researchers. Currently, Library of Congress is still working on setting up the system for that, but they're still not available for the Library of Congress, unfortunately. And I'm using DataSift, and funny enough, it's a UK-based company, but from my understanding, some of the people who funded the startup, they come from the Silicon Valley because they have a lot of executives who are based in Palo Alto. And their main market is in the United States because, for example, finance industry, there's a high demand right now, because in finance, if you can measure the emotions of people and opinions of certain brands and companies, that means that you can probably predict how the stocks are going to do on the market. And I don't know how exactly they do that, but somehow they can calculate and predict. Maybe that's why the economy is getting better, because they're capturing those tweets, hopefully. And then the step 2, so once you figured out what keywords you're going to look for, I was going to look for the word archaeology right before the conference, and then you have to decide if you want to capture them in English or in some other languages, and these are the languages that I chose. And then you have to write the code in DataSift. It's CSDL language, so I wrote the code for those 2 languages. And unfortunately, they captured approximately well, here I made a little mistake. What I did, I asked them to capture the data not only for Twitter, but also from Instagram, Hootsuite. Hootsuite is a platform for you can send tweets from Hootsuite, you can Facebook from Hootsuite. It's a multi-social media platform. Google Plus, host a log. I didn't ask for that one, but that's in the package, so thank you guys for providing me with this exotic new social media outlet. Blogs and some others. So, slightly over 2,000 tweets were captured on archaeology in those languages, including English, and that's not a lot because if you compare it to London Olympics or United States elections, this is a very small portion of data. But I just did that to show you how to work with this methodology. And another thing about this methodology, it's very popular among political scientists. So right now during the elections, a lot of political scientists are trying to measure the public opinion, and this is the same methodology they're using. And then the next step is to choose what kind of a linguistic processing software you're going to use. My software of choice is called Look, and this is how it's spelled right here. And it's pronounced Look. It's seriously pronounced Look. Interesting. And it's developed by a scientist at the University of Texas at Austin. And this is my software of choice, not because I come from Texas, but because a Mason Golder article had that same software. But there are other software opportunities that you can explore. Just ask if you have a friend who is a computational linguist or who knows NLP. Most of those options are based on n-gram word recognition and categorization. So just look around. There might be better options than that one because that one is pricey. But let's read. So this is the data set with the first part of the tweets. And when I saw that number 1,500, I was like, seriously? this is so sad. And it was in 3 days. So why is archaeology not popular? It's sad. We need to engage more. And then I captured more right after. So total, there was about 2,000 tweets. And then this is what it looks like when you process the data in different languages. They give you sentiment analysis. They assign certain numbers to each sentiment, and their mechanism works. So for how they developed the software, they had like a focus group of scientists for native speakers of the language, and they would analyze blogs and writings and scientific articles in different languages, and then they break them down into different categories, and then they would give a mark to each category, and then they would give it to other scientists who will either agree or disagree in those categories, and then some other scientists. So it was such a sophisticated research project in 2007 that I think that's the reason why a lot of social and political scientists use that. I just personally trust that. If Mason Golder used that, then that's worth it. And so then you run the statistics, you compare the values for whatever emotional category you're interested in. And they have 89 emotional categories for English and slightly less for other languages. And its categories are the following from what I remember: personal, impersonal, egocentric, more collectivist. There was one that's called, the one that was called even sexual. I didn't look at that one for archaeology because naturally probably the score's not very high. So and then I just did a simple positive and negative emotion category analysis, and so this was the result for Italian, French, Spanish, German, and English. And so there are in some categories French was the same. There are not so many tweets about archaeology in French to begin with, and it seems like positive is predominant, but is it? We would need to run the statistics. And I just did the simple, I bootstrapped data again and did the distribution of positive and negative emotions to compare if there is really that much difference. And if you can see, if you can look at these two distributions, they're pretty much the same. So there's not so much difference if you look at this raw, this is the raw data before the statistics. Yes, English obviously is super positive, but then again, English, like the most popular language, people tweet about everything and write about. So this was the result. And that's one of the tweets that I came across, and another one. So, so basically people do tweet about archaeology, but as you can see, some people in their archaeology class are thinking about something else. So, yes, and basically things to consider about open access databases. Is it legal? That's the question number one in your country, because across different countries it's very different. How is it going to work with the scientific community? Is it a credible information? Is it something that can be published? So those are the things to consider for open access. And for tweets and generally social media, my only advice is to, if you decide to study, make sure that you look at the current network analysis or social science or political science analysis that are available out there, and follow the strict and exact methodology, because you can't just use some tool. For example, Cloud offers positive and negative emotion analysis, but then they do not explain their methodology and their algorithm. And if there is no algorithm, then how are you going to publish and make this credible? So you need to use either a software or recognized linguistic software that would actually process the data, and then you could play with it and do statistics. So thank you so much for having me here.